get thrown out. Well, in this country, maybe they wouldn't get thrown out of office. But then they come out with this and saying, oh, we're doing everything we can. Really? How many times did Doug Ford get on the phone when he was looking for personal protection equipment back at the beginning of all this with the suppliers and demand they get it? A dozen at least. How many times did Angela Merkel get on the phone for vaccines? How many times have other European leaders, and even in the United States, how many times were they on the phone to these major manufacturers demanding this vaccine? If Trudeau has done it once, you could knock me over with a spoon. This is just outright.
Well, Nick, you know what I'm going to say, Nick?
Go ahead, say it.
You need to take your pills, Nick.
Oh.
You need to get back into the Zen mood.
I don't even like Zen. I don't know who he plays for, and I don't want him on my right wing.
Okay, so what does Build Back Better mean? I just need to know that. So the implication is that our economy, as it was fundamentally flawed, because I can't think of another explanation of what Build Back Better means. So Build Back Better means we're going to, have fewer restaurants and more, I don't know, homeless shelters. I say that, it sounded a lot more facetious than I was intending it to, but it's still not an invalid question. I mean, what exactly does it mean to build back better?
Well, this is another one of the useless, and that's why I said it was a word salad. What's the word I'm looking for? When they come out with these, another one is slogans. That's it. Empty slogans that don't mean anything.
A pious platitude.
Yes, thank you. Brilliant. When they used to say, you notice they don't say it much anymore, we're fighting for the middle class and those who willing to join it, or something like that. In other words, they were the only reason you entered the middle class, if at all, and that anybody who wasn't in the middle class, obviously there was something wrong. If you put any logic to it, that's what they were saying. They didn't do that because they didn't know what the heck they were talking about. The middle class is a fluid place, just like the upper class is, just like the lower class is. People move in and out of classes all the time, and not just at school. Economic classes change because people's conditions and circumstances change. Even if you're poor, if you win $64 million in the lottery, you're not in the lower class anymore. Now, you might be 2 years from now if you don't know how to spend it or keep it. But look, life is not a fixed. It's not something you bolt to the floor and say it's going to stay there. It doesn't remain the same. It changes over time. And for people to get involved in this kind of nonsense, empty-headedness, it makes me. You know who I worry about far more than the government and what they want to do? Is the people who don't understand that they're speaking, but they're not saying anything.
Well, I'm glad that you're mentioning the non-static or the fluid nature of classes, because, people talk about class these days in a country like Canada or in the United States, and they refer to it almost as though they're referring to the class systems that existed, previously in Great Britain, still there, but it doesn't have as much impact anymore as it used to, or in places like, Imperial Russia before the Revolution. And when we talked about classes in that sense, we were talking about aristocracy. In other words, you were born into a family that often had wealth, but not always, not always, to the degree that people often think. So that was you were born into a station in society. That doesn't exist anymore. When we talk about the middle class in Canada, we're talking about an economic category, a reflection of the money that you earn. And Nick, as you point out, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds on this, but because we've talked about this before on our show, and it's just important to emphasize this again, when you talk about people at the low end of the economic ladder, the people that are earning the least, that's typically the student entering the workforce. The guy or the gal that's flipping burgers at McDonald's, okay? They're going to take the lower unskilled jobs, all right, that are available to them. But as they get older, as they get more work experience, as they get their education, presumably, okay, they're going to climb the economic ladder almost invariably. Now, there are people that do get stuck, but it's a very, very, very small number of people. It's not like people go, wow, 10% or 15 or 20%. I'm just pulling those numbers out of the air to illustrate the point. But 10 or 15 or 20% of people are living at below poverty level, okay, which is a different issue altogether. But that ignores the fact that the overwhelming majority of people living in the lower income bracket are in a couple of years going to have worked their way into the middle income bracket. And people don't seem to understand that, Nick. And the people in government that presumably do understand it, and I believe that they do, which makes it much worse, because they're not ignorant. They're just trying to deceive people for cheap political gain. And that, I think, is a very dangerous game to play, Nick, because it's not just that you're feeding misinformation, but you're corrupting people. You're encouraging envy and jealousy and covetousness. And, those might be biblical terms, but, the fact that they happen to be biblical terms doesn't invalidate the destructiveness of these and the corrosiveness and the soul spirit destroying nature of these kinds of emotions when you become imbued with jealousy because somebody happens to have more at this moment than you do. I mean, there's something profoundly wrong with that, and there's something profoundly immoral about leaders in our society that would encourage that kind of attitude and that would cultivate it and grow it for cheap political gain.
And this is the kind of stuff that I think is that it seeps in, and I hate to bring this up, but socialism, this is one of its hallmarks, is the idea that we have, envy between the classes as a method of division. And it's unfortunate that I think that way, but the evidence is pretty clear. Like, why does it matter? Why does it matter to people how much money somebody else makes or what kind of car they drive? Here's something I was thinking about the other day. When somebody I have an old boat at the end of my driveway. It's an antique. It's a 1948 Taylorcraft, and would take about $65,000 or $70,000 to recondition. Now, I don't have the money to do that, but for the sake of this discussion, let's say that I did. Okay, I set aside, let's say, a budget of $80,000 to put that back in the water because it's worth it. All right, it's a piece of history. It's a beautiful old boat, and think about this. Okay, so I dropped $80,000 on what a lot of people call a luxury item. How much taxes does that generate? How many man hours in work does that generate? How much docking fees, fuel, food, all this stuff that go into owning and operating a boat like that goes into the economy because somebody happens to have the money to have something nice. By reducing and continuously hammering those who have a dollar more than you do, you're taking away from the tax roll or from the public treasury, because now those things are like if somebody goes out and buys let's say $1 million mansion. Well, it costs money to insure it. It costs money to pay the property taxes. It costs money to mow the lawn. It costs money to clean the pool. It costs money. You have to hire people to do all this for you. It generates far more than its own worth over its lifetime for the public treasury than if he lived in a modest, well, today a modest home is $300,000. Okay, but you get what I mean. If we all lived in little boxes made of ticky-tacky, there'd be no money for the tax man because nobody'd have any money to spend.
And of course,
there'd be no economic activity.
And of course, recognize what that means. No money for the tax man means no health care, no public education, no welfare, no museums, no art galleries, no paved roads. So you're quite right, Nick. But again, for me, the thing that I find the most disturbing of this is it's not the practical aspects of this. It's the psychological, it's the emotional, it's the spiritual side of this. It's very, very corrupting, and I think it's even if you're raising children in an environment where they are subjected to this constant envy, this constant class envy, I think it's borderline child abuse. I think it's awful to raise children in this environment, and I think it destroys their souls, and I think it destroys the souls of adults too. And it's a shameful thing when our political leaders are prepared to foment the kind of jealousy and envy in society that we see simply, as I say, for cheap, fleeting political gain. So there it is, Nick. That's my as they say, here endeth the epistle, and we have to Nick, we have to take a break. Time is flying by here. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening to the live show, stay put. We will be back in a few minutes. If you're listening to the podcast, thank you for joining us. And please join us again next time on the Nick and Joe Show on ThinkRadio.ca.